Hello and welcome back to the channel. Alright, let's get straight to today's question, team. Can I get stronger in a calorie deficit? So, for anyone that doesn't know what that means in plain English, can I be in a fat loss phase or dropping weight phase and still get stronger? The very, very short answer is yes. But like most things in fitness, it is a yes but. So, sometimes strength athletes, powerlifters, strongmen, anyone that even is going to the gym, anytime you're touching an external load and you're moving it around, you're basically doing strength training. So can you do all that, get stronger, and still stay in your calorie deficit? Yes, you can, but here are some key points worth discussing. Why? If you're somebody, for example, who is in a competitive sport, we'll say powerlifting, why are you trying to cut and simultaneously get stronger? You're in a sport that is based around strength, so why would you do anything to limit that? Now, I know some people are like, oh, well, I want to stay in a weight class. If you have to excessively cut down to get into a weight class, listen, pal, you're not in that weight class anymore, alright? Now, I know some people do it, some freak athletes are fantastic at cutting pre-competition, and that's fine, fair enough, but you'll notice the majority of the time they're walking around at usually 8 to 10 kilos heavier than what they compete at. Now, the average athlete might only be 3 to 5 kilos they need to cut, if even that. But overall, unless you're like one of these freak athletes or like you're a high-end lifter that there's some sort of financial stake, I wouldn't really worry about overly cutting into competition. But on a surface level, can you do it? Yes, because what you're doing when you strength train, or you're doing like, let's say, SBD, the squat, bench, and deadlift, is you're trying to generate force against an external load, which doesn't necessarily need a massive amount of muscle mass to do. That's why the biggest jacked dudes are not always the strongest. Do you know what I mean? Like, most bodybuilders are amazingly aesthetic athletes, but they're not necessarily the strongest guys in the gym, whereas I know some like small powerlifters that are strong motherfuckers, you know what I'm saying? So with that in mind, what you're doing is creating a response from your nervous system against the external load. So a lot of what you're going to be doing is managing your training load to get the appropriate response while under limited resources for recovery, in this case your food. So when you're in a calorie deficit, if calories are the resource, you're limiting that resource to, elicit your body to use stored resources, or in this case fat tissue, to make up the deficit that you've created in the diet. So if managed correctly, the training volume will, the amount of food you're eating and protein you're intaking will be adequate to still recover enough from the fatigue load you've gained from the training. That's a really word vomity way to say it. But that also means you're going to have to really hyper focus on other aspects of recovery. Your sleep is going to need to be spot on. Your stress management is going to need to be spot on. Your water intake is going to need to be spot on. Otherwise, you risk overshooting in training or underperforming in training, which means that can affect your adaptations to those movements going forward, which is then reductive because you're not going to be getting as strong as you could be getting in a sport based on being strong at 3 moves. So bear that in mind. However, if managed correctly, sure, you can continue to make strength gains in a fat loss phase, though I would be skeptical that that would be the same rate of progress that if you had just ate at maintenance or in a surplus during that phase. Food is a recovery resource for our body, specifically protein. So if your protein intake is adequate, you usually can be alright, assuming the training load isn't so much that you're like absolutely wiped every session, which therefore could potentially impact your adaptations over the course of the block or the mesocycle or the entire macro cycle, depending. In saying all that, that does not necessarily mean you should go into a surplus to gain strength either, because just getting fatter is not necessarily a good thing either. Now, I know going into a surplus does not mean just getting fat, but there's this like mentality around like strength sports that, you know, if you go into a surplus, you need to eat fucking everything, and everything's justified. It's justified to eat 6 cupcakes before training. Listen, unless you're like a high-end lifter, it's not worth sacrificing your health parameters for the sake of a sport that nobody really gives a fuck about. So, if you do decide to go into a surplus to gain weight, or to gain, you have more resources and maybe go up a weight class, gain some muscle along the way for powerlifting, that's absolutely fine, and something that I don't think should be discouraged at all, so long as it's done smart. There's a big difference between being in a 400 calorie surplus and a 1000 calorie surplus. Your body can only do so much with the extra resources taken in, and the same the other side. If you do go into a deficit while you're still trying to elicit a response from strength, it's probably better to be in a more reserved, let's say 200 to 300 calorie deficit than, let's say, an 800 to 1000 calorie deficit, which is probably going to be very, very detrimental to your gains overall, other than shredding down. So one thing I would say, and this is actually it's a quote from a coach named Connor Campbell of Odyssey Strength that I fucking love. He goes, if you chase 2 rabbits, you lose both. So if you're trying to get leaner and get stronger, you're not going to quite get as lean as you want, and you're not going to quite be as strong as you want. You're going to lose both rabbits. So if you're going to pair up 2 goals, try pick synergistic goals. Like, for example, getting stronger and getting bigger. Getting stronger and getting more muscular. You know what I mean? If you said, for example, you wanted to do a fat loss phase, you're like, well, I want to improve my cardiovascular health and I want to drop body fat. Those 2 things are relatively synergistic. They can work together. Same the other way, you know, you can say, well, like I said, you want to get bigger, you want to get stronger. You can work on your like anaerobic and aerobic cardio health while in a calorie surplus too, just FYI. But you're better off if you're after one thing, chase the one damn thing. If you want to be a strong athlete, you're a strength athlete, do everything you can around that goal to facilitate that goal. In this case, sleep, eat, hydrate, and train to an appropriate level of stimulus. Doing all these things will be fine. One last thing I will say on the surplus end of things is, if you are, just because I'm saying all that, you know, if you go, it's probably preferential to be in a maintenance phase or a slight surplus to during a strength gain phase. That does not give you an excuse just because you're in a calorie surplus to forgo those other things. Your sleep is still paramount, your stress management is still paramount. If you forget these things, your training is still going to end up in the toilet. So there is definitely a middle ground between, you know, trying to get a bit leaner and stronger, so, you know, being in a controlled deficit that won't overly impact your strength development, though regardless it probably will impact the routine a little bit. Same way, if you're in a surplus, you probably are going to get stronger, but in all likelihood, no matter how careful you are about it, you're in a surplus, you're probably going to gain some body fat. Neither of these things are bad, it just depends on where you're at. My personal recommendation would be, specifically if you're doing your first competition, I just shared a video a couple of days ago of how to prep for your first competition, so I would encourage watching that and checking out the links I have in the description of that video. I'll have the video in the tag at the end here, you can click and have a look. But if you are heading towards your first competition, be it AB Series 6 or AB Series 7 or IPF Compson Day Return or IPO or GPC or wherever, if it's your first competition, I think the first thing you should do is go in at whatever weight you are, eat as normal, and compete at whatever weight you're at, and see how you get on. Over time, you can see, do you need to grow into a class or cut into a class? Most athletes tend to come in to powerlifting about a weight class or two too low. One competition I had back in August 2019, I think I was just over 91 kilos. I was like 91.3. My last competition, I weighed in at 101 kilos. That is 10 kilos gain. Now, specifically at that time, the 101 kilo one, I had not water cut, I had not done anything into the comp, and I had like eaten a big roast dinner the night before, so I was likely carrying a lot of water. I'd say I was closer to like 96 or 97, but in any case, I'm a heavier person than I was previously. But my numbers reflect that. I'm nearly 100 kilos on my total since then. Not only that, I'm a lot more muscular, I feel healthier, my resting heart rate's lower, so gaining that exercise is not actually necessarily be a negative experience for me. So bear all this in mind if you're somebody who's maybe a little bit afraid of gaining size, or they associate increased weight with being obese or being fat or being unhealthy. I personally would prioritize my actual health, my health parameters, for example, my active minutes, my waist circumference, my resting heart rate, my sleep. I would rate all this higher than just arbitrarily getting stronger at 3 lifts. Though if I can do all those things and get stronger at these 3 lifts, I'm pretty happy about that. So, can I get stronger in a calorie deficit? Yes, but consider everything I've just said over the course of the last 10 to 12 minutes, however fucking long I've been talking. So, gang, thank you very much for joining me once again here on The Iron Mindset. I am Iron Ian. I'm going to get out of here. Drop that like, leave me a comment, and make sure you are subscribed. Be so kind as to share the video. Perhaps there's somebody out there we can help, or we'll get a laugh off the content I'm creating, like I'm sure you do. Alright, gang, I'm out of here. Have a good day. Talk to you next time.